The Mafia boss found her collapsed in his kitchen, his invisible maid, shaking with sobs she'd hidden for 3 years. He should have walked away. Should have fired her on the spot. Instead, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and asked the question that would shatter everything. "Why are you crying?" Her answer? "Because 3 years ago tonight, my daughter died." His hands started trembling. Because 7 years ago, on this exact night, he'd lost his daughter too. And his wife. And his brother. All in one fire while he chose work over family. 2 strangers. Same nightmare. Christmas Eve. What happened next in that snowbound mansion would force them both to face the one thing they'd been running from. The terrifying possibility that broken people can still feel something. But by morning, one phone call would destroy everything they'd built in the darkness. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you are hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments section where you are watching from, because tomorrow I'll be giving you an interesting story such as this one and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The mansion didn't feel like Christmas. Brian Reyes stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his study, a glass of bourbon catching the cold December light. Below, the city sprawled like a kingdom he'd conquered and found wanting. Behind him, a 12-foot tree glittered with ornaments he'd never touched, decorated by staff whose names he didn't know. The designer had called it elegant. He called it hollow. The house was silent except for the grandfather clock in the hall, counting down to midnight like a sentence. Brian preferred silence. Silence didn't ask questions. Didn't require explanations. Didn't remind him that Christmas Eve 7 years ago, his world had burned to ash. His phone buzzed. Business. Always business. A shipment delayed, a territory dispute, problems that required the version of himself he'd perfected. Cold, calculated, untouchable. He typed a response with efficient brutality. Handle it. I don't want details. Brian Reyes, they called him. The man who turned grief into power, who rebuilt an empire from tragedy. What they didn't know was that he'd done it by feeling nothing. Absolutely nothing. He moved through the house like a ghost haunting his own life. The kitchen was pristine. Marble counters bare, wine bottles arranged by region, everything in its place. His reflection in the dark window looked like a stranger in an expensive suit. The clock struck 9. Somewhere in this mausoleum, his maid was finishing her shift. He'd seen her maybe a dozen times in the 6 months she'd worked here. Quiet woman. Efficient. She appeared, cleaned, disappeared. Exactly what he paid for. He thought her name was Nancy. Or Patricia. Something with an N. That's who you've become, a voice whispered. You don't even know her name. He drowned it with bourbon. 3 floors below, in the service quarters, Patricia Laurent folded the last towel with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She'd survived today. Barely. Patricia pressed her palms against the cool marble of the laundry room counter, breathing through her nose. You're okay. You're okay. Just finish. But she wasn't okay. Today, Lily would have been 8 years old. Should have been. Would have been. The cruelest tense in the English language. Patricia moved through Mr. Reyes's mansion like a shadow, which was exactly what he paid her to be. Invisible. Silent. She knew this house better than her own apartment. Knew which floorboards creaked, which rooms he never entered, where the hidden sadness lived. The photos turned face down in his bedroom. The locked door on the 2nd floor. The whiskey bottles he thought no one counted. She understood haunted houses. She lived in one inside her own skin. The grandfather clock chimed somewhere above. 9 o'clock. She had her cleaning checklist memorized. Kitchen final check, trash out, alarm set, leave through the service entrance. Then the bus. Then home. Then she could finally break. Hold on, she told herself. Just hold on. But when Patricia entered the kitchen and saw the small, ridiculous Christmas tree the designer had placed on the windowsill, complete with tiny ornaments and a miniature angel, Something inside her snapped. Lily had loved angels. The first sob came from somewhere deep, a place she'd kept locked for 3 years. Then another. Then she was collapsing into the chair at the small staff table, her face in her hands, her body shaking with the force of grief too long suppressed. She cried for her baby girl. For the Christmas mornings they'd never have. For the way Lily had called her mama, in that sweet, high voice. For the drunk driver who'd stolen her daughter and left Patricia in this half-life of survival. She cried because she was 31 and worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford the nursing school she'd deferred. Because she was alone. Because it was Christmas Eve and all she had was an empty apartment and memories that cut like glass. She didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. Didn't hear him stop outside the kitchen door. Didn't know that Brian Reyes stood frozen, his hand on the doorframe, listening to a sound that shouldn't exist in his carefully controlled world, the sound of another human being breaking. For a long moment he didn't move. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away. This wasn't his problem. He didn't do feelings. Didn't do connection. That part of him had died in a house fire 7 years ago, and he'd spent every day since ensuring it stayed buried. But something in her crying, the rawness, the devastation, spoke to something he'd tried to kill but couldn't. Brian pushed open the door. The woman, Patricia, he remembered now, her name was Patricia, jerked upright, her dark eyes wide with shock and horror. Tears streaked her brown skin. Her hands flew to her face, trying to hide evidence of humanity. Mr. Reyes, I'm so sorry, don't. His voice came out rougher than intended. They stared at each other across the pristine kitchen. For 6 months, she'd been invisible. Now she was the only thing he could see. A woman shattered, real, painfully present. And for the first time in 7 years, Brian felt something crack in the fortress he'd built around his heart. What would you do if you found someone crying alone on Christmas Eve? Have you ever felt invisible in someone else's world? Drop your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your story. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Patricia couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Her boss, the man who'd never said more than 3 words to her, who existed in her world as a distant, cold presence, stood in the doorway of his own kitchen, staring at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. She should apologize. Should explain. Should do what she'd spent her entire life learning to do. Make herself smaller, less troublesome, easier to dismiss. But the tears wouldn't stop. I'll go, she managed, her voice breaking. I'm sorry, I said don't. Brian stepped fully into the kitchen, and the door swung shut behind him with a soft click that felt like a lock engaging. Patricia watched him move, this man in his expensive charcoal suit, his silver-threaded dark hair perfectly styled, his face carved from the kind of hardness that came from deliberate practice. She'd cleaned his home for 6 months and never truly looked at him. Now, trapped in this impossible moment, she saw things she'd trained herself to ignore. The tension in his jaw. The way his hands hung at his sides like he didn't know what to do with them. The barely perceptible tremor in his left hand. He was uncomfortable. Maybe even afraid. That shouldn't have been possible. Brian Reyes, she'd heard whispers from the other staff before they'd all been let go, one by one, until only she remained, was not a man who felt fear. He was the man who made other people afraid. She'd seen the black cars that came late at night. Had heard phone conversations through closed doors, the kind of conversations that made her clean faster and leave quicker. But right now, watching her cry, he looked almost human. Why are you still here? His question came out like an accusation. It's Christmas Eve. It's past 9. Patricia wiped at her face with the back of her hand, mascara smearing. I work the holiday shift. You approved it. The extra pay I needed. That's not what I meant. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition neither wanted. He knew. Somehow, he knew she was here because she had nowhere else to be. Because going home meant facing an empty apartment and memories that would destroy her. Tell me your name, he said quietly. She blinked. What? Your name. Your full name. Patricia. Patricia Lauron. Her voice was small, confused. It's on my employment papers. I know what's on the papers. He moved closer, each step measured, like he was approaching something wild that might bolt. I'm asking you to tell me. Something in his tone, not command, but something closer to a plea, made her answer. Patricia Christine Lauron. I'm 31. I've worked for you for 6 months and 2 weeks. And I shouldn't be crying in your kitchen. Why are you? The question landed like a stone in still water. Patricia's breath hitched. She should lie. Should say she wasn't feeling well, that it was nothing, that she'd never let it happen again. But she was so tired. So tired of being invisible. So tired of carrying this alone. Because 3 years ago tonight, my daughter died. The words came out flat, lifeless. She'd said them so few times that they still felt unreal, like a story about someone else's tragedy. Brian went very still. How old? 5. Her name was Lily. She watched something flicker across his face. Pain so sharp and immediate that it startled her. His hand gripped the back of the chair across from her, knuckles white. How? The word was barely audible. Car accident. Drunk driver. Christmas Eve. We were going to my mother's house. Her voice cracked. She was in the back seat singing Jingle Bells. She always got the words wrong. And then there were headlights and... Patricia couldn't continue. The sobs took over again, wrenching through her body. She didn't see Brian close his eyes. Didn't see the way his whole body seemed to fold inward, like he'd been struck. Didn't see him reach for the counter to steady himself. When she finally looked up, he was pouring whiskey. 2 glasses. He set one in front of her with a hand that shook. Drink. Mr. Reyes, I don't. Brian. And drink it. Trust me. Patricia stared at the amber liquid, then at him. This was insane. She was sitting in her billionaire employer's kitchen, crying about her dead daughter, while he poured her expensive whiskey like they were. What? Friends? Equals? But she picked up the glass. He sat across from her, actually sat, at the small staff table where she'd eaten countless silent lunches, and downed his whiskey in one swallow. His eyes stayed on her, and she realized with a jolt that he was actually seeing her. Not through her, not past her, but seeing Patricia. The person. The mother. The woman who was drowning. I work on Christmas Eve too, he said finally. Every year. Have for 7 years. Because you have no one to celebrate with? The words escaped before she could stop them. Horror flooded through her. You didn't say things like that to men like Brian Reyes. But he didn't fire her. Didn't explode. Instead, something that might have been a smile, bitter, broken, touched his lips. Because I have too many ghosts. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly. Warmer. The outside world, with its Christmas lights and false cheer, seemed very far away. Patricia took a sip of whiskey. It burned, but it was grounding. Real. Why are you still here? She asked, echoing his earlier question. It's your house. You could be anywhere. I told you. Ghosts. What kind of ghosts does a man like you have? His jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought she'd pushed too far. Then, the kind that scream when you try to sleep. The kind that make you work until you're numb because numbness is better than remembering. He poured himself another drink. The kind that make Christmas Eve feel like a punishment you can't escape. Patricia's breath caught. She knew that feeling. Knew it in her bones. How long have you been running? She whispered. 7 years. His eyes met hers, and they were no longer cold. They were full of a pain so familiar it made her chest ache. You. 3. They sat in that knowledge. 2 strangers who suddenly weren't strange at all. Outside, snow began to fall. Soft, silent, covering the city in white. Neither of them noticed. The world had narrowed to this kitchen, this table, this impossible moment of recognition. Brian studied the woman across from him, and for the first time in 7 years, he let himself feel something other than cold control. He felt curious, aware, almost afraid of what might happen if he kept looking at her, kept seeing the grief that mirrored his own. Lily, he said, testing the name. What was she like? Patricia's face transformed. Through the tears, something like light appeared. Loud. God, she was so loud. She never stopped singing, never stopped talking. She asked a million questions about everything. A real smile now, fragile but genuine. She wanted to be a doctor. Because I told her doctors save people. She'd practice on her stuffed animals, giving them checkups, making up diagnoses. She was sunshine. Her voice broke on the last word. Brian's throat tightened. He knew that feeling, describing someone in past tense who should still be future tense. Someone who should be here, should be real, should be taking up space in the world. She sounds perfect, he said. She was mine. The simplicity of it, the pure, devastating truth, hit him like a physical blow. Before he could stop himself, before he could remember all the reasons this was a terrible idea, Brian reached across the table and covered Patricia's hand with his own. Her skin was warm. Real. She stared at their joined hands like she'd forgotten what human touch felt like. Maybe she had. Maybe they both had. I'm sorry, he said and meant it. I'm sorry you lost her. I'm sorry you're alone. I'm sorry the world kept turning when yours stopped. Patricia looked up at him, tears streaming freely now, but her gaze was clear. Searching. Who did you lose? The question hung in the air between them. Brian should pull away. Should retreat behind the walls that kept him safe. Should remember that he didn't do this, didn't connect, didn't share, didn't let anyone see the wreckage inside him. But her hand was warm under his. And he was so tired of being cold. Everyone, he whispered. The word hung between them like smoke. Everyone. Patricia felt the weight of it, saw the way Brian's face shuddered immediately after speaking, like he'd revealed too much and was already regretting it. His hand slipped away from hers, leaving cold in its wake. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against tile. This was a mistake. Wait. You should go home. His voice had changed, returning to that crisp, controlled tone she recognized. The boss. The man who didn't have conversations with the help. The weather's getting worse. I'll call you a car. Patricia stood too, confusion and something like anger flaring in her chest. You can't just. We were talking. You asked about Lily. You said. I said too much. He moved to the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid. This isn't appropriate. You work for me. This. He gestured vaguely between them. This doesn't happen. What doesn't happen? Two people having a conversation? We're not two people. His words were cold, precise. I'm your employer. You're an employee. There are boundaries. Something in Patricia snapped. Maybe it was the whiskey. Maybe it was 3 years of swallowing her grief and making herself invisible. Maybe it was the fact that for 5 minutes, she'd felt seen, really seen, and now he was trying to erase it. Boundaries. She heard her voice rise and didn't care. You sat down. You poured the drinks. You asked about my daughter. You held my hand and told me you lost everyone. Don't you dare make me feel crazy for responding to something you started. Brian turned, and the look on his face was dangerous. Not physically. She wasn't afraid he'd hurt her. But emotionally dangerous. Like a man barely holding himself together. You don't understand what you're asking. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just. She pressed her palms to her eyes, exhausted. I'm just trying to understand why you're running away from the first honest conversation you've probably had in years. Because honest conversations lead to complications. Complications lead to caring. And caring. His voice cracked. Caring gets people killed. The kitchen went silent except for the whisper of snow against the windows. Patricia lowered her hands slowly. What happened to you? Go home, Patricia. Tell me what happened. Miss Laurent. You called me Patricia 30 seconds ago. You held my hand. You can't just go back to Ms. Laurent like none of this happened. Brian's phone buzzed on the counter. Then again. Then a call came through, the vibration loud in the tense silence. He grabbed it, glanced at the screen, and his whole demeanor shifted. I need to take this. He answered without waiting for her response. What is it? Patricia watched him transform. His voice dropped into something cold, commanding, laced with threat. I don't care what Martinez thinks. He pays or he loses more than the shipment. No, I want it handled tonight. If he's stupid enough to test me, remind him what happened to the last person who did. She took an involuntary step back. This was the man she'd heard through closed doors. The man whose name made other staff members whisper nervously. The man who built empires through fear and control. But she'd also seen the other man. The one who'd gone pale when she mentioned Lily's age. Who'd poured whiskey with shaking hands. Who'd said, everyone like it was a confession. He ended the call and stood there, not quite looking at her. You should be afraid of me, he said quietly. Should I? Yes. He met her eyes finally. Because I'm not a good man, Patricia. I'm not someone you share your grief with over whiskey and pretend we're the same. I never said we were the same. Then what do you want from me? The question was almost desperate. Patricia didn't know how to answer. What did she want? She'd come here tonight planning to survive the shift and go home. Now she was standing in her employer's kitchen, arguing with a man who terrified and confused her in equal measure, feeling more alive than she had in 3 years. I want you to stop pretending you didn't feel something when I told you about Lily, she said finally. I want you to stop acting like the last 20 minutes didn't matter. They can't matter. Why not? Because. The word exploded out of him. Because I can't, I don't. He gripped the edge of the counter. I built this life by not feeling. By not connecting. By making sure nothing and no one could ever hurt me again. And then you're crying in my kitchen and suddenly I'm. He stopped abruptly, like he'd revealed too much again. You're what? Patricia pressed. Remembering. His voice was barely audible. Remembering what it felt like to be human. And I can't afford that. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow swirled in eddies past the window. Patricia's phone chimed. A notification. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and her stomach dropped. Bus service suspended. Weather advisory. Brian looked up sharply. What? The buses. They're not running. Storm's too bad. She pulled up the transit app, hoping she'd misread, but there it was. All routes suspended until further notice. I'll call a cab. Or Uber. Something. But even as she said it, she was checking prices. Surge pricing had kicked in. $70 to get across the city. She had $32 in her account until Friday. Don't be ridiculous, Brian said, watching her face. You'll stay here. No. No, I can't. It's not a request. The guest rooms are prepared. You'll stay until the storm passes. Mr. Reyes. Brian. He rubbed his face, suddenly looking exhausted. And I'm not asking, Patricia. Look at it. He gestured to the window where snow was falling so thick the city lights were barely visible. You want to freeze to death trying to prove a point? She wanted to argue. Wanted to maintain some dignity, some distance. But she was tired. So tired. And the thought of going home to her empty apartment, alone with her grief on this night of all nights, made her want to cry again. Just for tonight, she said. Just for tonight, he agreed. But they both knew something had shifted. You couldn't unknow someone once you'd seen their wounds. Couldn't unfeel a connection once it had sparked to life. Brian moved to pour himself another drink, his movements careful, controlled. There are guest rooms on the 3rd floor. Pick whichever one you want. Towels in the bathrooms. If you need anything. I won't. If you need anything, he continued as if she hadn't spoken, the kitchen is stocked. Help yourself. The formality was back, but it rang hollow now. They'd seen too much of each other. Patricia moved toward the door, then paused. Brian. He looked up, and there it was again, that flicker of vulnerability before his walls slammed back into place. Thank you, she said. For the whiskey. For listening. For seeing me. Something in his expression softened. You're hard to miss. She left before either of them could say anything else that might crack open the carefully maintained distance they were trying to rebuild. But as Patricia climbed the stairs to the guest floor, she felt the ghost of his hand on hers. Heard the break in his voice when he'd said, everyone. And she knew with absolute certainty that neither of them would sleep tonight. Below, in his study, Brian stood at the window and watched snow bury the city. His phone buzzed again. Business, always business. But for once, he ignored it. Instead, he was thinking about a woman crying in his kitchen. About the way she'd said, she was mine with such devastating simplicity. About how her grief had felt like looking in a mirror. About how dangerous it was to start feeling again. He poured another drink and tried to remember why he'd built these walls in the first place. But all he could hear was Patricia's voice. You can't just go back to Ms. Laurent like none of this happened. The problem was, something had happened. And neither of them knew how to unhappen it. Patricia couldn't sleep. The guest room was beautiful. All cream linens and soft lighting, a bed so large she felt lost in it. The kind of room that should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a museum exhibit. How the other half lives. She'd showered, washing away the mascara and tears, and found a robe hanging in the bathroom closet. It was too big, probably meant for male guests, but it was warm and soft and smelled like expensive detergent. Now she sat by the window, watching snow blanket the city, and tried not to think about the man 3 floors below. Tried and failed. Everyone, he'd said. What did that mean? Who had he lost that made him build a fortress around himself so complete that he didn't even know his maid's name? Her phone showed 11:47 p.m. Christmas Eve was nearly over. She'd survived. Barely, but survived. Patricia was about to attempt sleep again when the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then darkness. The power had gone out. She stood, heart suddenly racing, feeling her way to the door. The hallway was pitch black, and the house had gone eerily silent. No hum of heating, no ambient electrical noise. Just wind and the faint sound of... Was someone moving downstairs? Hello. Her voice echoed. No answer. She felt along the wall, found the banister, and slowly descended. The marble was cold under her bare feet. The house felt different in the dark. Less like a mansion, more like a maze. A light appeared below. Flashlight beams sweeping across walls. Patricia. Brian's voice, sharp with concern. I'm here. I'm on the stairs. The beam found her, and she squinted against it. He lowered it immediately. Careful. Don't rush. She made her way down carefully, and when she reached the bottom, he was there, closer than she expected. She could smell his cologne, something woodsy and expensive. He'd changed too, she realized. Gone was the suit. Now he wore dark jeans and a charcoal sweater. Somehow, he looked more intimidating in casual clothes. More real. Power's out, he said unnecessarily. I noticed. Probably the whole grid. Storms worse than predicted. He gestured with the flashlight toward his study. I have a generator, but it only powers essentials. Refrigerators, security system. Not the whole house. So we're in the dark. For a while, yes. He paused. Are you okay? The question caught her off guard. Why wouldn't I be? Some people don't like the dark. I'm not afraid of the dark, Mr. Reyes. Brian, he corrected quietly. And I didn't say afraid. I said don't like. There was a difference, and he knew it. Patricia wondered what he saw in her face, even in the dim light. I'm fine, she said. I'll just go back upstairs. The guest rooms won't have heat. The generator doesn't reach that far. He hesitated. The fireplace in the living room still works. It'll be warmer there. I don't want to impose. Patricia. He said her name like he was tired of her politeness. It's going to get cold. Stop being stubborn and follow me. She wanted to argue, but he was already walking away, flashlight beam bobbing, and she didn't fancy freezing in a dark guest room to prove a point. The living room was massive, another testament to wealth she couldn't fathom. But Brian moved efficiently, lighting the fireplace with practiced ease. Within minutes, flames were crackling, throwing dancing shadows across the walls. He'd set out blankets, pillows, 2 glasses of water on the coffee table. Like he'd been planning this. You knew the power would go out, she realized. I checked the forecast. It was likely. He settled into one of the leather chairs near the fire, gesturing to the couch. Sit. You'll freeze standing there. Patricia sat, pulling a blanket around herself. The fire was warm, the darkness beyond it complete. They were in a bubble of light and heat, the rest of the world locked out by storm and night. This was dangerous. She knew it was dangerous. Why are you being nice to me? The question escaped before she could stop it. Brian looked at her across the firelight. Is it so hard to believe I might be a decent person? You said yourself you're not a good man. I'm not. But decent and good aren't the same thing. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I can be both ruthless and kind. They're not mutually exclusive. Which one are you being right now? I don't know. The honesty surprised her. They sat in silence, listening to the fire pop and crack. Outside, the wind howled. The house creaked and settled. It felt like they were the last 2 people on Earth. Can I ask you something? Patricia said finally. You can ask. I might not answer. When you said everyone, how many is everyone? His jaw tightened. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my wife, my daughter, my brother. Each word sounded like it cost him. All in one night. Patricia's breath caught. How? House fire. 7 years ago. Christmas Eve. He stared into the flames. I was supposed to be there. I was working late. Always working late. My brother called, said he'd stop by to drop off gifts for Isabella, my daughter. He was watching them while I finished a deal. While I chose money over being home. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Patricia heard the agony beneath it. The wiring was old. Something sparked in Isabella's room. By the time the fire department arrived. He stopped. They said it was fast. That they didn't suffer. People say that to be kind. It doesn't help. Brian. I built this house with the insurance money. Made it perfect. Fireproof. State-of-the-art everything. Made sure nothing could ever hurt me again. He laughed. Bitter. Because that's possible. Because you can control everything if you just try hard enough. Patricia understood then. The empty house. The isolation. The walls. It wasn't your fault, she said softly. Wasn't it? I wasn't there. I was closing a deal on a restaurant I didn't need. I chose work over family, and they paid for it. The fire wasn't your fault. The faulty wiring wasn't your fault. You can't control everything, Brian. Watch me try. The bitterness in his voice cut her. Is that why you work on Christmas Eve? She asked. Punishment. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way I know how to survive the day. He looked at her finally. Why do you? Same reason. Survival. She pulled the blanket tighter. If I'm working, I'm not thinking. If I'm not thinking, I'm not drowning. Does it work? No. You. No. They shared a sad smile. The fire crackled between them, and Patricia felt something shift. Not attraction, not yet. But recognition. They were the same type of broken. What was her name? She asked. Your daughter. Isabella. His voice softened. Bella. She was 4. She loved butterflies. Obsessed with them. We'd spend hours in the garden, looking for monarchs. She'd narrate their lives, give them names and backstories. A real smile ghosted across his face. She was convinced they were fairies in disguise. She sounds magical. She was everything. His throat worked. My wife, Gabriella, she was a teacher. Patient, kind, everything I'm not. She balanced me. Made me better. When she died, I died with her. Just kept walking around. Patricia knew that feeling. Lily made me want to be better too. Made me believe I could be more than I was. When she died, I lost my future. All the things we'd planned. Teaching her to drive, watching her graduate, meeting her kids someday. All of it just gone. Like someone cut the story off mid-sentence. Exactly like that. They sat with that truth. 2 people living in the wreckage of stories that ended too soon. Can I tell you something terrible? Patricia whispered. Please. Sometimes I forget what her voice sounded like. I have videos, but it's not the same. And I panic, thinking I'm losing her all over again. Like if I can't remember perfectly, she'll disappear completely. Brian nodded slowly. I know Isabella's room by heart. Every toy, every book exactly where they were. I've kept it the same for 7 years. But sometimes I walk in there and I can't feel her anymore. It's just a room. And I hate myself for it. We're trying so hard to hold on. Maybe too hard. The admission hung in the air. Patricia shifted on the couch, and without thinking about it, moved closer to the fire. Closer to him. Do you think it gets easier? No. He met her eyes. But maybe we get stronger. Or maybe we just get better at pretending. I'm tired of pretending. Me too. The wind rattled the windows. The fire threw shadows that made the massive room feel intimate, small, safe. Tell me something about Isabella that made you laugh, Patricia said suddenly. Brian looked surprised. Why? Because we've been talking about death for hours. Tell me something about life. He considered this, and something like warmth entered his expression. She couldn't say spaghetti. Called it baschetti. Gabriella tried to correct her 100 times. Isabella refused. Said her version was better. He shook his head. We had baschetti every Sunday. Still can't hear the word without. His voice caught. Patricia smiled through sudden tears. Lily couldn't say yellow. Called it lello. Everything was lello. Her favorite crayon, the sun, bananas. I bought her a lello dress for Easter and she wore it until it fell apart. What happened to it? I still have it. In a box I can't open. I still have Isabella's butterfly net. Pink with purple mesh. It's in her room. They looked at each other, and something passed between them. Permission. Permission to remember. Permission to grieve. Permission to smile through the tears. Thank you, Patricia said quietly. For what? For saying her name. For letting me say Lily's. For making them real again, even just for a minute. Brian's expression softened in a way she hadn't seen before. They deserve to be remembered. Yes, they do. The clock somewhere in the house chimed midnight. Christmas Eve was over. Christmas Day had begun. Neither of them acknowledged it. They just sat by the fire, two broken people in a dark house, sharing the weight of grief that was somehow lighter when carried together. And for the first time in years, neither of them felt completely alone. The fire had burned low, casting the room in amber half-light. Patricia had pulled her legs up under the blanket, and at some point, she couldn't remember when, Brian had moved from the chair to the other end of the couch. Not close, but closer. Like gravity was slowly pulling them together. It was past 1 in the morning. Christmas Day. The loneliest day of the year for both of them, and yet, here in this dark house, Patricia felt less alone than she had in 3 years. "Can I ask you something personal?" Brian's voice broke the comfortable silence. More personal than dead children and house fires? He almost smiled. Fair point. He turned to face her better. "Why were you working 3 jobs? You mentioned nursing school. What happened?" Patricia sighed, pulling the blanket tighter. "Life happened. I was 2 semesters away from graduating when Lily died. I took time off to grieve, or try to. The grief didn't stop. It doesn't stop. But the bills kept coming. My husband, ex-husband, he left 6 months after the funeral." "He left you?" The anger in Brian's voice surprised her. "He couldn't handle it. Couldn't handle me. I was too sad, too broken. He said living with me was like living with a ghost." She laughed bitterly. "He wasn't wrong. I was barely alive. But instead of helping me, he just walked away. Filed for divorce. Moved to Seattle. Started over with someone who wasn't damaged. He's a coward. Maybe. Or maybe I was too much to carry. Don't." Brian's voice was sharp. "Don't make excuses for him. You lost your child. He lost his child. You don't abandon your partner in that. You don't get to choose the easy way out." The vehemence in his tone made her study him closer. "You didn't leave, did you? When Gabriella and Isabella died, your brother was there too. But you talk about them, not anyone else. You didn't have someone to lose you." His face went carefully blank. "No. I lost everyone at once. Maybe that was easier. Clean break." "You don't believe that." "No," he admitted. "I don't." They sat with that for a moment. "So your husband left," Brian continued, "and nursing school? Couldn't afford it. Between the funeral costs, the divorce, trying to stay in the apartment where Lily's room was, I went into debt. Had to defer school indefinitely. Took whatever jobs I could find. Cleaned houses, worked retail, picked up night shifts at a call center." She shrugged. "Your agency called about this position 6 months ago. The pay was good enough that I could drop the retail job. Still have the call center gig on weekends." "You work 7 days a week?" 6. I take Tuesdays off." "That's not sustainable." "Neither is being broke." She met his eyes. "Not all of us have the option to build empires from insurance money." It came out harsher than she'd intended. She waited for him to get angry, to remind her of her place. Instead, he nodded slowly. "You're right. I had resources. Capital. I turned grief into business because I could. You've been surviving hand to mouth while grieving just as hard. That takes a different kind of strength." The acknowledgement caught her off guard. "I'm not strong," she said quietly. "I'm just still here." "That's not the same thing." "Yes, it is." Something in his voice made her throat tight. When was the last time someone had seen her struggle and called it strength instead of weakness? Brian stood abruptly, moving toward the fireplace. He added another log, sending sparks spiraling upward. His back was to her, shoulders tense. "I need to show you something," he said. "And I need you to not ask questions until I'm done." "Okay." He left the room. Patricia heard his footsteps on the stairs, the creak of a door opening somewhere above. Minutes passed. The fire crackled. The wind howled. When he returned, he was carrying something small in his hand. He sat back down, closer this time, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly. He opened his palm. A tiny pink shoe. Child-sized. Scuffed and worn. "This is all I have left," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything else burned. Photos, toys, clothes. All of it gone. But this was in my car. Isabella had taken it off during a drive. Complained her foot hurt. I kept meaning to bring it back inside. I never did. Patricia stared at the shoe. It was so small. So heartbreakingly small. For years, I couldn't look at it, Brian continued. Kept it in a safe. But I couldn't throw it away. Couldn't let go of the last physical piece of her. So it sat in the dark, like I was sitting in the dark. Both of us locked away. When did you take it out? Tonight. He looked at her. When you told me about Lily. When you said she was 5. Isabella would have been 11 now. Sometimes I try to imagine what she'd look like, who she'd be. But I can't see it. I'm stuck with the 4-year-old who loved butterflies. I'm haunting myself with a memory. Patricia's vision blurred with tears. I do the same thing. Lily would be 8. I try to picture her, but I can't. She's frozen at 5 forever. Frozen in the back seat, singing the wrong words to Jingle Bells. Brian set the shoe down carefully on the coffee table between them. Do you want to know the worst part? Tell me. Sometimes I'm angry at them. His voice cracked. At Isabella. At Gabriella. At my brother Marco. I'm angry that they left me. That they died and I have to keep living. That they got peace and I got this endless, empty existence. And then I hate myself for being angry because they didn't choose to die. They didn't choose to leave me alone. I'm angry at Lily too, Patricia whispered. Angry that she was in that car. Angry that I couldn't protect her. Angry that she left me with nothing but memories and a Lello dress I can't look at. Tears streamed down her face. And I hate myself for it because she was 5. She was just a baby. She didn't deserve any of it. Neither did you. Neither did you. They stared at each other across the small space between them, and Patricia saw her own pain reflected in his eyes. The anger. The guilt. The desperate, clawing need for it all to have happened differently. I've never told anyone that, Brian said. About being angry. People don't want to hear that you're angry at the dead. They want you to be sad, to miss them. They don't want to know that some days, you're furious that they left you behind. I know. Patricia wiped at her face. Everyone expects grief to be pretty. To be poetic. They don't tell you it's also rage and resentment and wishing you died too. Have you? Wished that? The question was quiet, but heavy. Patricia nodded. The first year every day. I didn't want to be here without her. Didn't see the point. I'd stand on the subway platform and think how easy it would be to just step forward. Why didn't you? Because Lily would have been disappointed in me. She believed I was brave. How could I prove her wrong? Brian's expression was raw. Isabella thought I was invincible. She'd tell people her daddy could fix anything. After she died, I wanted to prove her wrong. Wanted to show her I was just as breakable as everyone else. But then I'd remember her face when I'd pick her up from preschool. Pure joy, like I was her whole world. And I couldn't do it. Couldn't let that be a lie. So we're both still here out of obligation to dead children. Maybe that's enough reason. They sat with that truth. Outside, the storm was weakening. The wind had died down to a whisper. Dawn was still hours away, but the night felt less infinite somehow. Patricia looked at the tiny pink shoe on the table. Can I tell you what I wish I'd said to her? Please. I wish I'd told her she made me brave. That before her, I was scared of everything. Scared of failing, scared of not being enough. But she looked at me like I hung the moon, and I wanted to be the person she saw. I wish I'd told her that she was my reason. For everything. She knew, Brian said softly. Children know when they're loved. Did Isabella know? Yes. His voice was certain. I told her every single day. Even when I was exhausted, even when work was crushing me, I'd tuck her in and tell her she was my miracle. That I'd never stop loving her. Then you did what mattered. So did you. They looked at each other, and something shifted. Not healed. Healing would take years, maybe forever. But shifted. Like a door creaking open after being locked for too long. Patricia found herself moving closer without deciding to. I'm glad you found me crying in your kitchen. I'm glad you didn't run when I was an ass about it. You were scared. Terrified. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. I'm still terrified. Of what? That if I let myself care about someone again, I'll lose them too. That caring is a curse. That I'm poison to anyone who gets close. Patricia covered his hand with hers, holding it against her face. I'm scared of the same thing. That I'll care and lose again. That I'll hope and be destroyed. That I'm not meant to have good things. Maybe we're both wrong. Maybe we're both right. Then we're at an impasse. Or an opportunity. His thumb moved against her cheek. A question. She leaned into it. An answer. This is a terrible idea, Brian murmured. The worst, Patricia agreed. But neither of them pulled away. The fire had burned to embers. Christmas Day was here. And two broken people sat in the darkness, holding on to each other like lifelines, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Stay, Brian said. Not a command. A plea. Not just tonight. Tomorrow. Stay. I don't think I can leave, Patricia admitted. I don't want to go back to being invisible. I don't want this to end and pretend it never happened. Then don't. Don't disappear. What are we doing, Brian? I don't know. But I know I haven't felt this alive in 7 years. And I'm not ready to bury it again. Patricia nodded, fresh tears falling. Me neither. They sat together as the fire died and the storm passed. Two people choosing, terrified, uncertain, to hope. Dawn came slowly, painting the snow-covered city in shades of pink and gold. Patricia woke on the couch, disoriented. She'd fallen asleep at some point, wrapped in blankets. Brian was in the chair again, awake, watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee in his hands. Morning, he said softly. You didn't sleep. Couldn't. He glanced at her. Coffee. Please. He returned with a mug, prepared exactly how she liked it, though she'd never told him. 2 sugars, cream. He'd paid attention during their months together, even when she thought herself invisible. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee as the world woke up. I want to show you something, Brian said finally. If you're ready. He led her upstairs, down a hallway she'd cleaned 100 times but never questioned. At the end was a door she'd assumed was locked. He opened it. Isabella's room. Patricia's breath caught. It was frozen in time. A 4-year-old's paradise. Butterfly decorations everywhere. Pink walls. Books stacked neatly. A small bed with stuffed animals arranged just so. I come here sometimes, Brian said quietly. Just to remember she was real. That I had this. That it wasn't a dream. Patricia walked slowly around the room, touching nothing. On the dresser, a photo. Brian, younger, smiling, holding a little girl with dark curls and his eyes. Both of them laughing. You look happy, she whispered. I was. I'd forgotten what that felt like until I saw that picture again tonight. She turned to him. Tonight. After you fell asleep. I came up here. And for the first time, it didn't just hurt. I could remember the good parts too. Her laugh. Her terrible singing. The way she'd run to me when I came home. His voice was thick. You did that. You made me remember the love, not just the loss. Patricia's throat tightened. You did the same for me. I've been so focused on the grief that I forgot Lily was joy. That she was sunshine and chaos and love. That I got to have her, even if not forever. Brian moved closer. Will you show me something? Do you have pictures? She pulled out her phone with trembling hands. Opened her photo album, the one she rarely looked at because it hurt too much. But now, with him beside her, it felt different. This is Lily, she said, showing him a photo of a little girl with bright eyes and wild curls, covered in paint, grinning at the camera. She's beautiful. She has your smile. And her father's eyes. The few good things he gave her. She swiped. This is her last birthday. 5 candles. She made a wish and wouldn't tell me what it was. Do you wonder? Every day. They sat on Isabella's bed, looking through photos. Patricia showed him Lily's first day of preschool, Lily dressed as a princess, Lily asleep with chocolate on her face. Brian showed her videos of Isabella chasing butterflies, Isabella's terrible dance recital, Isabella helping him cook baschetti. They laughed. They cried. They made their daughters real to each other. Thank you, Patricia said finally, for trusting me with her. Thank you for trusting me with Lily. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, intimate. Patricia's heart stuttered. Brian. I know this is complicated, he said quickly. I know I'm your employer and this crosses every line and it's too fast and too intense. But I need you to know, you matter. Not as an employee. As Patricia. As the woman who made me feel human again. You matter too, she whispered. More than you should. They were close now, so close she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes. His hand cupped her face, and she leaned into it, starving for touch after so long alone. Is this crazy? She asked. Completely. Should we stop? Probably. But neither moved away. Have you ever met someone who understood your pain without words? Sometimes the most unexpected connections heal us in ways we never imagined. What do you think? Can 2 broken people make each other whole? Let me know in the comments. The moment shattered with the sound of a phone ringing. Brian's phone, loud and jarring in the quiet room. He pulled back, tension immediately flooding his body. He glanced at the screen and his face went hard. I need to take this. He left the room, and Patricia heard his voice through the door. Cold, commanding, dangerous. I told you to handle it. I don't care what time it is. If Martinez thinks Christmas means we're weak, remind him what happened to the last person who tested me. The man from last night, the one who'd held her face so gently, was gone. This was the Mafia boss. The man who built empires on fear. Patricia stood, suddenly feeling like an intruder. She left Isabella's room and headed downstairs, needing distance, needing to think. What was she doing? This was her boss. A man who made threats over the phone. A man whose world she didn't understand and probably shouldn't want to. But she'd seen the other side of him. The broken father. The grieving husband. The man who'd made her feel seen for the first time in years. Which one was real? Brian found her in the kitchen, standing by the window. The snow had stopped. The city was returning to normal. Their bubble was breaking. I'm sorry, he said. Business. Business. She turned to face him. What kind of business, Brian? His jaw tightened. You don't want to know. Don't I? We just spent the night sharing our deepest wounds. Don't I deserve to know who you really are? You know who I am. Do I? Or did I just see what you wanted me to see? Her voice was rising. That phone call. You were threatening someone. On Christmas morning. What kind of man does that? The kind who survives. The kind who protects what's his. By hurting other people? By making sure no one hurts me first. He moved closer, eyes hard. You want the truth? Fine. I'm not a good man, Patricia. I told you that. I've done things that would make you run. I've hurt people. Destroyed them when they crossed me. I built this empire on blood and fear, and I don't apologize for it. Then what was last night? A moment of weakness. Last night was real. This is also real. Both things exist. I can't. She pressed her hands to her face. I can't reconcile them. The man who held me. The man who just threatened someone's life. Then maybe you don't know me as well as you thought. The words were meant to push her away. She saw it in his eyes. He was protecting himself the only way he knew how. By being cruel. By building the walls back up. You're doing this on purpose, she said quietly. You're scared, so you're pushing me away. I'm being honest. You don't belong in my world, Patricia. Last night was. It was a fantasy. But morning came. Reality came. And the reality is you're my maid and I'm a criminal, and this, he gestured between them. This can't work. Each word was a knife. So what? We just pretend it didn't happen. It would be easier. For who? For you. Tears burned her eyes. You made me hope, Brian. You made me feel again. And now you're taking it back because you're too much of a coward to risk being hurt. His face went cold. Watch your tone. Or what? You'll fire me? You'll threaten me like you threaten everyone else. She was crying now, angry and heartbroken. I thought you were different. I thought underneath all that control, you were just a man who'd lost everything, like me. But maybe you were right. Maybe you are just a cold, empty shell. The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. Brian's face went blank, the careful blank of someone who'd been struck in their deepest wound. Get out, he said quietly. Brian. I said get out. You're fired. Leave. I didn't mean. You meant it. And you're right. I am empty. I'm poison. And you're better off away from me. He turned his back to her. There's money in an envelope on the entry table. 3 months severance. Take it and go. Patricia stood frozen, horror and regret flooding through her. Please. Go, Patricia. His voice broke on her name, and that's what destroyed her. Because she heard it, the pain, the fear, the desperate need to protect himself by pushing her away. But she was hurting too. And she was tired of being hurt. So she left. 4 days. 4 days of silence. Brian hadn't left his study except to pour another drink. His phone rang constantly. Business that needed his attention, problems that required his ruthlessness. He ignored all of it. All he could see was Patricia's face when he'd told her to leave. The shock. The hurt. The way she tried to take back her words and he'd twisted the knife deeper. You're poison, a voice whispered. This is what you do. You destroy everything you touch. But another voice, quieter, newer, said, you're destroying the one thing that made you feel alive. The envelope with the severance money sat unopened on his desk. She hadn't taken it. Had just walked out into the snow with nothing but the clothes she'd worn Christmas Eve. He'd watched from the window as she'd climbed into a cab, hunched and small, and every instinct had screamed at him to run after her. To apologize. To beg her to stay. But he'd let her go. Because he was a coward. Marco's voice echoed in his memory. His brother, dead 7 years, but still present. You're afraid to live, Dom. You think if you don't feel anything, you can't lose anything. But you've already lost. You're just too stubborn to admit it. Brian opened a drawer. Inside was the information sheet from Patricia's employment file. Her address. Her phone number. Everything he needed to find her. He could go to her. Could apologize. Could risk everything on the possibility that 2 broken people might heal together. Or he could stay here. Safe. Alone. Empty. His hand shook as he picked up the file. Patricia sat in her apartment, staring at her phone. 4 days since she'd walked out of Brian's mansion. 4 days of replaying their fight. 4 days of hating herself for the words she'd said, and hating him for pushing her away. But mostly she missed him. She missed his voice. His presence. The way he'd looked at her like she mattered. The way he'd held Isabella's shoe with such devastating tenderness. The way he'd made her feel human again. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then something made her pick up. Hello. Silence. Then, it's me. Brian's voice. Rough, uncertain. Her heart stopped. How did you? Employee file. I know I don't have the right to call. I know you probably hate me. But I need. He stopped. Started again. I'm outside your building. I have something for you. If you don't want to see me, I'll leave it with your doorman and go. But if there's any chance you'll let me apologize, I'm here. Patricia stood, moving to the window. 5 floors down, a familiar figure stood in the snow. Dark coat. Head bowed. Holding an envelope. She should hang up. Should let him leave. Should protect herself from more hurt. But she was so tired of protecting herself. I'll be down in 5 minutes, she said and hung up. The lobby was empty except for them. Brian looked terrible. Unshaven, exhausted, haunted. Nothing like the controlled man she'd worked for. He looked human. Vulnerable. Real. Hi, he said quietly. Hi. They stood in awful silence. I'm sorry, Brian said finally. For what I said. For pushing you away. For being a coward when you were brave enough to call me on my bullshit. He held out the envelope. This isn't severance. It's something else. Patricia opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a check. Made out to her. Enough to cover 2 years of nursing school, with living expenses included. I can't. It's not charity. It's belief. He stepped closer. You said you deferred your dreams. I'm asking you not to defer them anymore. Go back to school. Become the nurse Lily believed you could be. Not for me. For you. Tears blurred her vision. Why are you doing this? Because you were right. I was scared. I am scared. Caring about you terrifies me because everyone I care about dies and I don't think I'd survive losing you too. His voice broke. But being without you these 4 days has been worse than any fear. I've been surviving for 7 years. You made me want to live again. And I pushed you away because I didn't think I deserved it. Brian. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking for another chance. I'm just asking you to take this money and build the life you deserve. And if someday, when you're Dr. Patricia Laurent and you've healed and you're whole, if you think of me and don't hate me, maybe we could have coffee. Just coffee. No pressure. No expectations. Just 2 people who saw each other at their worst and chose kindness anyway. Patricia wiped her eyes, then did something that surprised them both. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Brian froze, then slowly, carefully, held her back. Like she was precious. Like she might break. Like he couldn't quite believe she was real. You're not poison, she whispered against his chest. You're just hurt. And scared. And you deserve to be happy too. I don't know how. Neither do I. But maybe we figure it out together. He pulled back to look at her. What are you saying? I'm saying I forgive you. I'm saying I miss you. I'm saying yes to the nursing school money, but no to waiting years for coffee. She smiled through tears. I'm saying maybe 2 broken people can help each other heal. If we're brave enough to try. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having is. I'm still in a dangerous world. Then we'll be careful. I'm going to mess this up. So will I. We'll figure it out. Brian cupped her face in his hands. I can't promise perfect. I can't promise I won't be scared. But I promise I'll try. I promise I'll show up. I promise I won't push you away again. That's enough. He kissed her then. Soft, careful, full of hope and fear and possibility. She kissed him back, tasting salt from both their tears, feeling something that had been dead inside her flicker back to life. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. So what now? Patricia asked. Now we take it one day at a time. You start school in January. I work on being less of an emotionally unavailable ass. We have coffee. We talk. We remember our daughters and honor them by choosing to live, not just survive. And if it gets hard? Then we don't run. We stay. We fight for this. She nodded then. I need to tell you something. Okay. Christmas Eve, when I was crying, I wasn't just sad. I was at the end. I thought maybe this would be my last Christmas. That I couldn't do it anymore. Her voice shook. But then you found me. You saw me. You made me remember why I'm still here. You saved me, Brian. And I need you to know that. His eyes glistened. You saved me too. I was dead inside. Just going through motions. You brought me back to life. They stood in the lobby, holding hands, two people who'd found each other in darkness and chosen light. 3 months later, Patricia walked through the cemetery, flowers in hand. Not alone this time. Brian beside her. They stopped at a small headstone. Lily Christine Lauron. Beloved daughter. Forever 5. Patricia knelt, placed flowers, touched the cold stone. Hi, baby. I brought someone to meet you. His name is Brian. He lost his daughter too. Her name was Isabella, and she loved butterflies. She smiled through tears. I think you two would have been friends. Brian knelt beside her, adding his own flowers. I'm going to take care of your mom, Lily. I promise. They stood, moved to another section of the cemetery. Another small headstone. Isabella Grace Reyes. Our butterfly. Forever 4. Brian placed flowers, his hand shaking. Hi, princess. I want you to meet Patricia. She's special. She makes me laugh again. Makes me want to be better. I think you'd like her. His voice broke. I'm trying, Bella. I'm trying to live the way you believed I could. Patricia took his hand, squeezed it. They walked out together, the winter sun breaking through clouds. Are you ready? Patricia asked. She had her first day of nursing school tomorrow. Are you? Terrified. Excited. Hopeful. Same. They drove back to the city, not to his mansion, but to the small apartment they'd found together. Neutral ground. A fresh start. Inside, they cooked dinner together. Talked about their day. Laughed at something stupid on TV. Did all the normal mundane things that felt like miracles after so long in darkness. That night, lying in bed, Patricia said, Do you think they'd be happy for us? Isabella and Lily. Brian pulled her closer. I think they'd want us to live. Really live. Not just exist. Then that's what we'll do. Together. Together.